Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the latest episode of the Stephen King podcast. This is another bonus episode, and it is episode number 28. And this time I have with me returning guest, Craig DiLouie. Hello, Craig. How you doing?
Hey, Lou. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me again.
Thank you very much. Sorry that we had a little trouble getting set up at the beginning. It was totally my fault, but thanks for your patience. So for people who have not heard the previous interview that I did with Craig, you can check that out. It's bonus episode number 15, and it was almost a year to the date, actually. We're recording this on October 11th, Remembrance Day in Canada. This previous episode came out on October 13th, and it was relevant then, and it's even more relevant right now because of what's going on in the U.S. with the failure of recognition of the election results. And that book was Our War, and that talked about the possibility of a second civil war in the United States. So how are you feeling right now about that book?
The situation, it continues to fill me with high anxiety.
yeah, I bet.
4 years of mounting anxiety, and it hasn't gone away yet. I thought it'd be a relief to have a change in leadership, at least to have a president. You know, I'm not a huge fan of Biden, but it'd be nice to wake up one day and not have a president of the United States constantly trolling me and the world. So I'm actually happy to see a change in leadership. I'm just very, very nervous about what's going on now because Trump understands something the Democrats doesn't, which is that a lot of the court of public opinion is almost as important as the legal courts. Mm-hmm. And so he is playing to his base. He's taking the authoritarian playbook and trying to delegitimize the election any way he can. And so it's going to be a nail biter right to the end. Mm-hmm. We're seeing a removal of military leadership, which is really nerve-wracking. Yes. And we know that Republican governors, some of them would just love to change the electoral college result, which is something they're actually legally able to do. So we're in a nerve-wracking time. Mm-hmm. It's just piling on more and more anxiety on top of an already horrific situation with COVID, mm-hmm. Never-ending COVID, and then climate change starting to nip us in the bud, and now this on top of it, just making it worse instead of any shred of better, and it's just horrible. So. Yeah. So, I write and read horror fiction to try and escape all this stuff.
Yeah.
I try and scare the crap out of people so they don't have to think about the very real horrors in their life.
Yeah, I hear you.
But I think it'll have a good result in the end. I think that there is a soft coup in happening, but I think that it will fail. It's not close enough, I think, for him to pull it off. But if he could, he would. And it's sad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's definitely a rule breaker, and you wonder, like, after this, are they going to start legislating to make these sort of things mandatory? Because like the concession speech is more of it's not a requirement; it's more of a peaceful transfer, signifying peaceful transfer of power and whatnot. So, and then I think back to like 4 years ago, if it would have been mandatory that presidential nominees had to show their tax returns, like, would we even be here like 4 years later? So, I don't know if they're going to change a lot of rules for this or not, but we'll have to see. But I just found it quite interesting because your book Second War, or Our War, deals with this whole topic, and here we are a year later, and it's still alive. And I think everybody was hoping for a quiet Christmas, but I don't know if that's going to happen or not.
Don't know either. I mean, I think that the next stage is, I think it's in early December or late November. That's when the electors are required to vote. Which seems forever and a day from now.
Yes, it does.
But when that happens, that will at least be the official result. So technically, he doesn't have to concede until then.
That's right.
He doesn't have to do anything. But after that, it would be nice if he did, and there was a peaceful transition.
Absolutely. And I know there was a lot of celebration on election day, and could understand the joy and sadness on both parts. But I just kept looking at all those crowds and saying to myself, guys, these are all super spreader events. Like, unfortunately, the election has really taken away from what the focus should be, is on the handling of the COVID virus. And
Right.
It was like, yeah, there's a lot of people here. I don't know, 2 weeks from now, the numbers are going to be bad, I think, but we'll have to see. Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, your next book is The Children of the Red Peak, if I got that title correct, The Children of Red Peak. And so let's try to capture your mindset after you had finished Our War. What was germinating in your mind, and how did you end up with this book?
Well, I write two types of fiction. I self-publish pulpy series of short dime novels around military history. So I've had two very successful series launch, and that's been a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
But I also have a serious side as a writer, and so when I write for big publishers like Hachette and Simon & Schuster, I tend to write big idea standalone novels. And so I'd finished Our War, where I was confronting one of my fears, which is, existential dread about the state, about my country, and American exceptionalism, and alarm at a growing American tribalism that is confronting the very idea of America and splintering it into different stories of what America is, which weakens the country. It becomes a house disunited. And so when I wrote that one, I wanted to follow up with something else that was a big idea for me. And so I had tackled the whole idea of love being taken to an extreme until it becomes evil with Suffer the Children, then, love for country until it becomes an extreme that becomes evil. And then the next is with Children of Red Peak. It's about belief. It's about the human instinct for belief, and the fine line between belief and delusion, and how that instinct is useful to us. It's actually a survival trait for us to believe.
Right.
But it taken to its extreme, it can run amok and it can become evil. And so I was really fascinated with the idea of religion, or belief rather, religious belief, that has produced so much moral good in the world, also has produced much of its evil.
Right.
And so I was fascinated by that dichotomy, and I wanted to explore that with a novel about really humanity's relationship with the divine, as expressed through the story of a religious group that starts off great, but then this entity offers a deal, and they think it's God, and within their own logic system, they end up on this extremely slippery slope and end up descending into madness and evil.
And this story just takes place present day?
Yeah, it's set in near future. I couldn't set a present day, so to speak, because of COVID. But
right, I was wondering how you're going to handle that.
Yeah, so just to explain what it is. But before I get more into the idea of it, the Children of Red Peak, it's a psychological horror story. It's also a cosmic horror story, which deals with dread and humanity confronting something vast, a vast intelligence so much bigger than itself, and the feelings of dread and mystery and madness that can result from that. So it's a cosmic horror story. It's about a group of people. They grew up in an apocalyptic cult, and they survived its horrific end. And then when one of them commits suicide, the remaining survivors reunite to confront their past and the entity that appeared on the final night. So it's told in two timelines, one where we see the kids growing up in the group and how everything goes wrong, and the other years later where they're adults and they're coping with trauma and ultimately trying to find closure on the tragedy. So as your listeners will probably have gleaned by now, there's a little bit of a literary take here. So there's a lot of powerful themes dealing with faith, family, the fine line between belief and delusion, especially delusion, and ultimately proves lethal.
Okay. I'm getting a little bit of a It vibe from this. Is that a fair read at this point, or is that something you'd rather not have?
I don't mind. Yeah, sure. I enjoyed that element of it, the whole idea of adults confronting a past trauma, a shared secret, something horrible that happened in the past that they now have to confront. The Netflix is The Haunting of Hill House.
Right.
I've really enjoyed that aspect of it too.
Right.
Horror has a lot of tropes. It's a great big ugly family of subgenres and tropes. What my interest as a writer is always to either turn the trope on its head or examine its consequences.
Sure.
And so The Children of Red Peak actually does both. It looks at a cult from a more realistic point of view, where they're not just mesmerized helter-skelter killers.
Right.
We see a religious group whose ways may seem alien to some of us, but it's really not that bad, and they're happy with it, and that's all that matters.
Right.
But then something changes, they hear the voice of God offering a deal, and they transform into a horrific cult, what we would consider to be a cult.
Right.
With the difference between a religious group and a cult being in the level of harm, right? A lot of the horror here is how quickly and logically the group transforms from something good to evil. The novel also looks at what it'd be like to survive being in a cult that destroys itself, and how even though they survive, they never really escape.
Sure.
And eventually they'll have to go back to Red Peak to find closure. And then, looking at it thematically, I was interested in exploring the idea of how belief is a common trait, but it can run amok, as I said before. A lot of the inspiration for the novel came from a reading actually of the book of Genesis, where God tells Abraham to bring his son Isaac to a mountain and sacrifice him as a burnt offering. Abraham does it, and at the last moment, God tells him to stop. And I thought, wow, wouldn't it be interesting to tell that story from Isaac's point of view?
Right. Interesting. Okay. And so that there's three main characters that survive. I guess there's a fourth as well that then commits suicide as an adult.
Yeah, there's 5 survivors.
5? Okay.
One is off screen for much of the story.
Okay.
It focuses on 3, and then another one has committed suicide, which brings the 3 together.
Right. And the 3 characters, so they're all separated geographically as adults from one another?
Well, they live in near where they grew up and where everything went south at Red Peak, which is in California, but they don't live in the same.
Okay, so this story takes place in California?
Yes.
So is Red Peak is a fictional, or is it a...
Yes, it's fictional, and it's near Death Valley.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So they go from a very lush commune that they hacked out of the wilderness to create this bastion of Christian living. Pentecostal Christian living out in the wilderness to wait for Jesus to return and wait for the world to end. And it's a wonderful area. I mean, it's Tehachapi, I believe is how you pronounce it, and it's in Southern California, and it's you can grow food there all year. It's just perfect climate. But then they end up going to the desert to Red Peak, and that's where everything becomes a nightmare for them.
Right. So is there a trigger event for the one character that commits suicide, or is that too spoilery?
It's a bit spoilery.
Okay.
We find out it's never really understood exactly why she did it, but the characters all start to interpret the event as the story progresses. But yeah, there are 3 main characters. They are living very separate lives. They kind of don't want to be around each other.
Sure.
They want to let go.
Right.
We see them as children. And one of the reasons I did the timeline that way, to have them be kids, they're looking at all this happening to them in a very childlike way. They're very innocent. They have very little guile. They're accepting of, and it provides fascinating what ifs. Like, what if you took all this seriously, these religious beliefs seriously? And I do. I don't make fun of religion in this book at all. It takes it seriously, but then says, okay, well, what if? What if you're a teenager and you believe the world's going to end, and the minister of your church says in your community, this is your whole world to you, your parents, it says, yep, it's going to end in, say, 2 weeks. So we have to get ready for it. Well, what do you do? Yeah. How do you feel? How do you feel about the people you left behind outside the commune, or relatives that don't share your belief system? How do you feel? Do you have survivor's guilt? You're going to go to heaven and other people are going to be destroyed?
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many the psychology of it is absolutely fascinating if you take it seriously and say, okay, well, what then? What's next? And so you see these kids, And they all have a bit of a character trait. David is a bit of a hider. He came from family turmoil. His mom dragged him across the country with a sister. He ends up in this commune where he doesn't know anybody, and he's scared, and he's isolated from everything he knew. He has a tendency to kind of withdraw. His older sister Angela she's a teenager. She deals with everything with anger. You have Deacon and Beth. Beth's a bit of a negotiator. Deacon has this joy for life. So you see these traits in the kids and how they deal with the world they live in. And then as adults, years later, after what they survived and after everything they believed was broken right in front of them, and everybody was dead, they are now their core character traits we saw when they were children are now run amok as coping mechanisms. Okay. So David's not just a kid who tends to withdraw. He's completely withdrawn as an adult. In fact, his job is as a cult exit counselor. He helps people escape.
Oh, interesting.
From their belief system. And so so you get to see this interesting, not so much change in the characters as a basic trait of theirs has now become a run amok itself as a coping mechanism. And it is something that helps them get through the day, but is actually something that's holding them back from being the people they should be. Right. And so there was so the characters are very interesting. And I absolutely fell in love with them. And it's really about them in this book. I mean, there's lots of horrific things that happen, but it's really a character-driven book where we see people who survive something horrible together, and they're just trying to cope, and they come back together when they realize they're not actually coping. They may be surviving, but they're not living. And the only way they're going to get closure is to go back to Red Peak, but escaping a second time may not be as easy.
Oh, okay. And that's the hook for the whole story. Yes. Why they go back and
what they find there.
So from the sounds of this book, it's like one of my favorite type of horror genre is much like you mentioned, like with The Haunting of Hill House, or even like the recent Bly Manor, where you start with something that's very grounded in reality, and then you slowly progress from that into the supernatural. And it's, I think Stephen King calls it hiding the seams,
right?
Where you mix the real world with the fictional or supernatural world, if you will. And it sounds like you've done that with this story as well. And it also sounds like there's an element of science fiction in there. Is that correct?
Well, I don't know about the sci-fi, but supernatural, yes. And, or we believe so.
Okay.
And Stephen King, he's pretty much the master of providing a very grounded world and people you care about, so that when the horror does show up, you're twice as scared because you care about these people and the world feels so real. So your willing suspension of disbelief is very willing at that point, and you end up really enjoying the horror aspect because of the way it contrasts and fits into the real world that he's built. Another thing that Stephen King said on his book on writing was, the three types of horror, right? The gross out, the horror, and then the terror, and the terror being his favorite. He says it's the finest emotion.
Right.
And so he's always going to try and deliver that. And I think that's a great quote.
Yeah.
But that's what I tried to do in this book. There's a bit of a gross out. There's a bit of horror. There's a lot of terror.
Okay.
And a lot of the terror is cosmic. Like, what did these people have a relationship with? And what does that mean for everything else? What does that mean? And that sense of dread, that's one of the things I try and build in the book. The horror is more sublimated. The dread is constant.
Right.
And that is one of the things I tried to achieve with the book. And early readers have told me they experienced it that way, and I've been really grateful.
Okay, cool.
Because that's how I intend.
Yeah, because the best stories are ones about broken characters, and if you can build up the emotional investment into them, no matter where you take them after that, you've got the readers hooked, and they want to see if these characters are going to prevail or not.
Yeah, each book I write, I take a little bit of a different approach to the blueprint. Right. So in some books, I will write it more of a, I'll focus on the plot structure. Okay, so you have your inciting incident, the normal, everything changes, the character reacts, everything changes, the character attacks, everything changes, the character goes all in to win or lose.
Right.
And that is your plot, right? And then you also have character arcs where you have someone who has a wound, and they have a flaw or misbelief. They have a call to adventure. They take the hero's journey. They take that adventure, running through different obstacles. They have a need and a want. What they want externally is sometimes in conflict with what they actually need to fix their flaw or misbelief.
Right.
Finally, they do. And by doing so, they win or lose, depending on whether it's a positive or negative character arc. And so I kind of do a balancing act between plot and character, depending on the type of book it is. And so when I write my World War II stuff, it's very plot driven. In fact, it's a flat character arc. The character doesn't need to change, the world does, because the world's at war. And the character will change the war as an agent, and have a lot of agency to do that. But for these types of books that I'm writing, they tend to be more on the character side. So when I wrote this one, it all started with the character arcs. Who are these people? What drives them? What do they want? What do they need? How do they need to change? And do they change or not?
Right.
And then I fit it into the general plot.
Okay. Are the three characters, do they share the story equally, or is it from one of their point of views, or how did you do that?
They share it equally.
They share it equally.
And that's always a risk when you have multiple points of view. I like so-and-so, but I hate so-and-so. So whenever they showed up on the page, I wanted to throw up. And I was like, oh, okay, great. Yeah. But I loved so-and-so. And so, it's just a risk you take. I can say I gave each of the characters as an equal amount of love as the writer, but whether each character connects with the reader is going to be up to the reader. Sure. It's definitely a creative risk, but I wanted to show the different ways in which a past trauma can affect people, and different ways of coping with it, and different choices ultimately on how to confront it.
Right. And you mentioned with the one character, David, I guess you called him a hider. The other characters, they also, I assume, have some defining weakness or characteristic that you use to flesh out the character from?
Right. Beth was a negotiator when she was young. Okay. She could talk her way out of anything, and she liked to make everybody happy and bring peace. And she saw herself as that kind of role in the group. Right. As an adult now, she's a psychologist, and she kind of does that for a living. She went through therapy after she was rescued, and in an institution with her friends, and she loved how in control the therapist was. And so she was far less interested in him, quote, curing her, which she thought meant giving up her beliefs. Right. And much more interested in what he did and how he did it. And how he asked questions, and he was in control, and he could make everything fit. And so she became a psychologist in the aftermath. And so when we see her in the present day, she's has a hyper sense of self-control and awareness. Okay. But she's like everybody, like the others, she's a mess. She's not really living. She's just getting through the day. And then Deacon he's a singer in an indie band that's struggling indie band, and when he was a kid, he loved to sing, and he had a great joy for God and for the group, and he felt very loved by his mother. But then he felt all of that was betrayed when things went south. And when he was rescued and put in the institution, he ended up going through several sessions of poetry therapy, and he loved expressing himself. It didn't heal him. It made him feel the pain all over again, but he enjoyed that. He wanted to be reminded of that. He couldn't let go of that. He just kept, his whole life became about repeating that sense of trauma so that he could experience that pain again. And to him, that was living. And so when he sings, that led to him becoming a singer in this indie band, and he writes songs about how he's feeling. And when he's on stage, it's like almost like a ritual self-crucifixion where he can feel that pain all over again. Okay. And so clearly these are broken people. They're very likable characters, but they're heavily flawed by what's holding them back. Right. Things they think are strengths, but are actually flaws holding them back, and misbeliefs. And they need to cure that. And that's what the whole journey to Red Peak is about. Not only to solve the cosmic mystery about what happened to their families, why their families went down the dark road they did, right, and ultimately where they went, because the bodies were never found, but also to achieve some type of closure for themselves and heal. One way or the other, they're going to leave Red Peak fixed. complete.
Okay.
And that is their goal.
Right. So do these characters, are the sum of the characters together greater than the individual parts? Is there that kind of synergy going on with them, or how do they work together as a unit?
Well, I guess that this might call for an it illusion that, you're stronger as a group than you are individually. That aspect definitely in retrospect is at the fore here.
Okay.
Where these people, because they all some of them talk about going back and yeah, we should do that. Yeah, we should do that. Yeah, I should do that. And they don't.
Right.
It's too scary. It's too hard. They have to go back and relive all of it again. They have to, the base camp that they built where they lived for these horrific months is still there in ruin. And the mountain is still there, and they would have to climb that mountain, and they were afraid of it as kids. And so they would have to face a lot. And so it's something that, you would probably want to do as a with your oldest friends there with you.
Right. Interesting. I'm sort of getting, and maybe this is totally off base, and if it is, I'm sorry, but I'm kind of getting the color of space vibe from this, like with H.P. Lovecraft. Is that an element, or am I just reaching?
No, that's not crazy. There's definitely, it's cosmic horror, which is, comes straight out of the Lovecraft mythos. Not that this is Lovecraft mythos. I don't want to misrepresent the book, but that sense of cosmic dread that we're dealing with something enormous that we don't understand, and that confronting it may be a source of madness. And so there's that aspect of it. That's why I would call this novel not just psychological horror, but cosmic horror. Okay. There's definitely an element of that here, especially with the core mystery of why did the families do this? What is on Red Peak, if anything? And so Color Out of Space, or pretty much any Lovecraft story, I think, Okay, cool. I mean, and just that sense of 25% of the horror, maybe actually less with a Lovecraft. It's maybe 5% of a Lovecraft story is the actual horror. Like the really bad thing is revealed. And 95% of it is dread of the bad thing being revealed. And so this is maybe 75-25. Okay. But definitely has that kind of proportion where there's a constant dread that this bad thing is going to be revealed or is going to happen. And that's one of the great things about having two timelines where some of the characters are looking back. They have these feelings. You see what the impact of the event, but you kind of know what the event is, but you don't know everything yet. And so that it's a mystery that is slowly going to be revealed in the past. And then in the present, the mystery of, are we going back and what are we going to find when we get there? That's the next mystery that has to be revealed. And so those are the things that I hope, keep the reader turning pages to find out. And do you find it pretty easy to switch between adult and children viewpoints? Yeah, I've gotten better at it. I've written about kids in several of my stories. I have kids, a lot of what I write is born out of my fears for them. Sure. Primal fears, because I want to protect them. All right. And so, the first time you try and write kids, it's kind of like when you're a man and the first time you try and write a woman. It's something that you shouldn't do with the mindset of, I'm going to write a kid. I'm going to write a woman. You write a person with certain needs and wants, certain vocabulary, certain backgrounds, certain personality traits. And so for the kids, it's once you look at it from that tool set and you have your tool set up, it's much easier to write the kids. And so I would write them as from a much simpler point of view. Things are a little at their age is a little more exaggerated, how they express themselves, how they see things. And so they're really just people. They just look at the world a certain way and they express themselves a certain way. And they have needs and wants that are that are more in keeping with the age. Okay. And then as adults, that was much easier to write, but that had its own challenges. I'm dealing with someone who's deeply buried an enormous trauma, and now they have to. Now I've had my own traumas in the past, et cetera, but I really had to dig deep to find that they're right on the razor's edge in terms of it's something that has really defined their whole life, but that they're living with and they think they're on top of, but maybe they're not. So there was a lot of balancing that had to go on there. And then probably the biggest challenge was saying, I have a kid who is this, and now they're an adult who is that.
Right.
And I wanted the reader to be able to say, yeah, I can see how as an adult, that's who they are now. Because I met them as kids.
Right. Interesting. So how did this book rank in terms of how the writing process went for you? Was it not bad, or was it hard, or was it in the middle? Where does it stack up against your other books?
Oh, I think it was about the same. You know, I do a lot of research that provides all these wonderful details.
Okay.
I developed the character arcs. I had a rough plot, and I just went to town on it. And I was, probably, it's not so much a function of this book versus other books, but every time I write a book, it gets easier.
Okay.
Because you just get better at craft. It's like that Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours thing.
Right.
And they found it in brains of writers who write a lot. Your brain becomes in tune to writing, just the way Olympics train their muscles, for certain sports, Olympians. Yep. It's the same thing with writing and picking up a violin. The first time you play a violin, it's going to be horrific, right? But after you keep doing it and doing it, you get better and better, and your brain actually starts to orient chemically, and it's the synaptic pathways, everything towards that one task, because your brain's saying, oh, this is really important. And every time you form pathways, you reinforce them, you build new ones, you reinforce those, and you get better and better and better at it. So I'm twice the writer I was last year. I'm half the writer I'll be next year. And that's always going to be that way. And that's okay because I'm better, 10 times the writer I was 10 years ago.
Right.
And so so this book was easier in that respect. It's also nice to be able to write with a great editor like Bradley Engler at Orbit, where he and I know each other now, and his edits are not fix this. They're more like, I think this could be awesome if we, and I'm like, yeah, okay, I'm going to do that.
So he's looking to elevate it.
And which is just the right approach with
for sure.
Me, because when you're producing a novel, you're giving literary birth, and the last thing you want to hear is that your kid's ugly, and it's it's a very fragile state, which is one of the reasons why I don't go in for to have reader crits. What do they call those? Crits, right?
Yeah, writing group
and critiques. I could, because then I find myself starting to try and write to please them. It's a very emotional, fragile, you're easily influenced kind of time when you're writing, producing something big. So I'd always rather produce it, give it to an editor who's paid to look at it and tell me exactly what he needs to publish it. Right. And then I'm like, yeah, I'll do what you say. Okay. Or I won't, and here's why. And we work it out, and then it gets published, and it's a much less stressful, process for me. And that, the kind of security most writers don't have. I acknowledge that, but I can say it's good, and it has worked for me extremely.
Yeah, it sounds like paradise, writer's paradise.
It's
pretty cool.
It's good. Well, Bradley is. I mean, he's a wonderful editor. Anybody out there gets to work with him, you're lucky. Okay. And Orbit's just a great company all the way around. I've had nothing but a positive experience.
Cool. Just getting back to your characters for a second, there's a question I'm dying to ask you about them. Did one of them take prominence over the other ones, or did you have to fight with that? And did any of them do anything that surprised you that you hadn't planned for?
Well, no, they're all equal. All right. But they, again, going back to that whole idea of you don't want to favor one character over the other, or the reader might have a problem with it. Right. You have to give your all if you have multiple points of view. Right. But during the writing process, didn't one come to the forefront a little bit more often for you than the others? You mean in my heart? No. I didn't. I mean, I had a thing with David because I'm a bit of a withdrawer sometimes. I shut down sometimes at stress. Yeah. And so I kind of, I felt for him a little bit, or that came a little more from
naturally.
Me.
Yeah.
Plus he has a family. Right. And that came a little more from me. Sure. that fierce love for your kids, and ultimately that's going to be your higher power is your children, and you're always going to choose them.
Right.
But I didn't love one character over the other. I loved them all more than the others for like one thing. Like I loved Deacon's indie music playing and that world he ran in.
Right.
I loved Beth for the psychology. She understood that she was a psychologist and treated people for trauma, so she spoke in that world and lived in that world where she could clearly define and control everything. And then because, a lot of trauma people have had trauma, they're a bit of control freaks too, right? I'm probably guilty of that as anybody else.
Right.
And then David, I liked because of his earnest yearning to do right by his family, but increasingly shut down as life gets harder and harder for him.
Yeah.
And so that's what I would say that the characters for me were equal in my heart.
Okay, very cool.
But you had a second part of that
question.
Well,
I was just wondering if any character did something that you hadn't planned for that surprised you, just sort of came out organically while you were writing.
Yeah, always. Yeah. That always happens. But you breathe life. I mean, it sounds so zen and silly. The character told me what she wanted to do.
Right.
It's like, really? But yeah, actually, yes.
Yes. Oh, okay.
That's how it works.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So it just sounds so pretentious. I hate saying it, but it is exactly how it works. If you breathe enough life into the character and give them their own motivations, they will always surprise you as a writer and tell you that they are not going to do what you had pigeonholed them into doing.
Right.
Like to make the plot work. Right. They're like, nope, I'm not doing it. And you as a writer have to make a choice. You can force them, and the reader will see. You see actors in TV shows where the script got bad, like in Game of Thrones. Yeah. You're like, Tyrion, you used to be smart. John, you used to be interesting.
Yeah.
And Daenerys used to be like a morally good person, and then they changed because the writers changed, but the actors are still there, right? You still see their faces, but something is not right, and the reader will smell that. So always good to let the characters do their own thing. Don't force them into the plot. Let them be, and then run with it as the writer. Right. That's the joy of writing. You can plot as much as you want, but in the end, we're all pantsers. Those. That term meaning you write by the seat of your pants. I don't recommend it from the soup to nuts, but I am a plotter, and I think I'm much more efficient, fast, and effective that way. But in the end, I'm a pantser, where there's that process we call discovery, which is this wonderful word because that's exactly what it is. You plot everything out and you start writing. You start discovering the book as you are writing it, and that's the real joy. That's when the real joy as you get into that groove, and you are not only in your characters' heads like an actor, understanding their motivation and making them, helping them do what they're going to do, but you're also an actor in the head of the book itself, and you're letting the book do what it's going to do. Right. And it's a really beautiful process, and it's why I do it. Yeah. I mean, if you look at the amount of labor that goes into these things, when I add up all the labor that went into all the books that failed, and all the bitterness in an industry that tells you no 1,000 times until you maybe get a yes. Right. And all the books I've written since then, it wasn't worth the money. I can tell you that much. I mean, if I put that time into something else, I could actually be a rich man. But it's that joy, that love. It's not to get the good review and the pat on the back, although we like those things because we want to have our art validated. It's really about just being able to do what you love and to keep being able to do it in some way, shape, or form.
I think that's all I had about this book. Is there anything about it that hasn't come up in the conversation that you wanted to mention?
No.
This is all great. Good. Okay. And so I'm curious what you're working on now, or is it too early for you to say?
Well, I'm taking a bit of a break from the big fiction with the big publishers. I've been having so much fun writing these pulpy series. Okay. That I've decided that I think next year, unless the killer idea comes to me, something I want to pitch to Orbit or another big press, I think I'm going to dive into that for a bit more. It's just been so much fun, and the sales have been absolutely incredible. Okay. And so that's probably what I'll be doing. Some more World War II fiction, some modern military fiction. One book I've just completed is on about a future war with China in the Pacific, which is real interesting story. And that's going to come out next year as well. And then I'm thinking about some dark fantasy.
Okay.
And so I'm conceptualizing these different, series of short, pulpy books and just getting them out. And the self-publishing is a lot of fun because I have this really great team. I have a great editor, a great book designer, great cover designer, and I love having control over the whole process. And I can just deliver really fun books at a really low price and just make people happy. It's just at this stage where I'm at, especially after the last year, the last 4 years, it just seems like really nice, just to do that and kind of like just get everything else out of my head and just focus on the art and have some fun.
Yep. So a nice change of pace for you.
Yeah.
Totally. Okay, cool. So this book, The Children of Red Peak, is available November 17th. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. And it's coming out from a brand of Hachette, which is one of the world's biggest book publishers and one of the best in my view. It'll be available in pretty much everywhere, physical, online bookstores. And the audio rights were recently acquired by Dreamscape Dreamscape.
Okay.
So the audiobook will be available soon as well. So
okay.
So I hope your listeners will check it out. It's been getting a lot of terrific reviews from magazines like Library Journal and Booklist and Publishers Weekly. And so I hope that they will check it out, and I hope they enjoy it.
I see. Yeah, you have Cemetery Dance. Very nice. Yeah, that's good. Yes. That's good stuff. Okay, well, it's been a blast to have you on again, and I look forward to reading this book. It sounds like something right up my alley. So I really enjoyed your previous book, Our War. I thought that was also very well done. So I want to thank you for coming on, and continued success as you go forward.
Thank you, Lou. It's always a pleasure.
Okay, you take care now.
You too.
Okay, bye-bye.